the qualities we're looking for in candidates to join our practice, really the primary one is curiosity, above and beyond everything else. If someone is curious, we can teach them. If someone is curious, they usually have an incredible portfolio, or they have special skill sets or special passions, but curiosity underpins it all. So the biggest challenges in hiring today do not come from the breadth and depth and talent of the pool. That's extraordinary. What the biggest challenges for us as architects practicing in California is California. There's a concern across the world about it. There's a perception that it's not maybe where someone who's emerging might want to be. Even though it's always been the golden state and a land of promise, promise has come with expense. And so young people and emerging talent have to decide if they're willing to come here for an extraordinary professional opportunity, personal opportunity, and maybe one of the most beautiful places on the planet to be living in, because there's a price tag associated with it. So, pandemic was something that none of us would have ever expected in our lives, right? It seemed like science fiction. And when we all went away, we had the technology to quickly adapt. But there was something lost in the translation, and it did have to do with the nature of collaboration and creation. And I think we saw that, especially after a second year of being in reserve, especially those of us in California, which were probably locked away longer than many other places in the world just because of the nature of where we live and politics. And when we've emerged from that, one of the things that we've discovered is that it's not the same as it was before pandemic in the way that we actually work, because of not only the tools and the methodology, but the way in which some of us are in the same room and some of us aren't. We're in the process of just getting ready to renovate the space in which we work, and we're staying in the same environment. But when we began the process, I turned to the folks who really lead the design conversation across the studio, and I asked them, advise us as to what we should do differently, because you're day-to-day working with everyone, and no one knows better what that means in terms of creating an environment that's going to support the way in which we need to work today. And so what we found from that is that rather than a large, open, really completely flexible studio, we're creating a series of micro neighborhoods, each kitted out with the technology and tools that everyone had at home and that everyone has on concept board or on Teams, but it's in the physical and virtual environment simultaneously. Our practice has always been deeply focused on work-life balance, and I don't think it's just because we're Californians and we appreciate that people, there's a reason they live here more than just being in the studio. They're living here to be part of the California experience. So one of the things that we do is we look to capitalize on that. We look to create a practice environment where people have the opportunity to leave the studio to do part of their work reporting. We actually look for new partnerships and collaborations beyond what might traditionally one think of as a work environment. For example, for the past couple of years, we've been co-leading a graduate research studio at UC Berkeley. And it's a research-based studio, but it's a design studio comprised of students who come from all over the world. And as the professional collaborators, really the co-teachers of the studio with folks at the university, the studio comes from Cal to San Francisco, and we go from San Francisco to the studio at Cal. So people who are in the practice are put into an immersive environment with academics, students, and research environment. We also look at projects in which we're really doing something for our communities. So we'll take on special projects in which it might mean that our folks are out in the community at awareness raising events, community events. So it's important for us that people who practice actually never forget that foundationally, the emerging professionals come from academia, and that professionally, we are only as good as the company we keep. And so being engaged in our communities is central to who we are. And so those reaching out and pulling in are ways in which we look to create a balanced place for the people we work with us. So in creating a diverse practice, as Californians, we're blessed from the outset that we live in a community that represents ethnicities from across the world. San Francisco may be one of the most diverse cities on the planet. And so when we hire and recruit, we're conscious that we want to make sure that our practice represents our community. We noticed really during pandemic and just before that there was less minority representation, and that's probably not only for us but in the profession at large. And so we actively reached out and have formed a partnership with Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, in which we sponsor a scholarship for a diversity student and offer an internship for them, so that a student who might have graduated from college and walked into our practice and looked around and said, well, this looks great, but it doesn't necessarily look like me, will meet us because they're part of us. And so as they become part of us, their colleagues and friends also realize that there's a seat at the table for them at HOK, regardless of who they are. So, you can never, ever overestimate the power of a mentor. I was blessed with having Bill Valentine, who was the leader of HOK for many years and the head of design, really from the day he hired me, always look after me. No matter what was going on, he was always checking in with me. And I can say with a surety that I would have never had the career and practice and the experiences that I've had in my life if it were not for the generosity of that person. And so for me, foundationally, the most important thing I think I can do as a practice leader is create that foundational platform of generosity for those in our practice and those who might want to be an architect themselves. I interview candidates for Cornell, where I'm a graduate of, that for young folks who aren't able to get themselves to Ithaca to interview with the interviewing committee. So I'm one of the architects in California who meets with them. And when I meet with them, they ask me questions about being an architect, and I tell them that, architecture isn't only about designing buildings. Architecture is about designing your career too. And that the most important thing you can do, especially at that point in your life, is you're not going to know all the answers, but you can design a path as to where you want to be. I certainly did. And I did that with the help of mentors. They were generous enough to both look after me and answer questions. But I always saw it as a design exercise, never as just something that was going to happen. You can make it happen. I think the most important quality of leadership is generosity. Because someone who's generous is thinking more of the we than the me. And a leader isn't someone who is standing there expecting people just to line up behind them. A real leader is someone who is there because everyone else is around them and supporting them. And that person is supporting everyone else around them. So it's a really a circular thing. It's not a point on a mountain. And so when we as my partners look at what we're looking for in leadership and emerging people, we're looking for the qualities of people who do several key things. Firstly, as an architect, they listen. They listen to their communities and their clients, and they listen to the people they work with. They have the judiciousness and the emotional intelligence and maturity to make thoughtful and informed decisions that are based on the we and not just themselves only. And that finally they have the generosity of spirit and soul to make sure that what they're doing is they're creating a platform for not only the people they work with today, but for all those people who potentially are coming after them. And you think about a firm like HOK. HOK is perhaps 75 years as a practice. It's been built on successive generations of leadership. And every time those generations have changed, they look like the people of the time and of that place. And today, our leadership looks at that time and of that place. I couldn't be prouder that Kimberly Dowdell, who's an HOKer from Chicago, is the incoming president of the National AIA, the 100th president of the AIA, and the first Black woman president of the institution. What's so exciting and interesting about the generation of young designers and architects coming out of school today, which I have to say is very different than mine, and even though the one after myself, is that without exception, the young generation is looking to figure out how they as an individual can be part of something bigger than themselves. And I believe that's not just something that's individual for them. It strikes me as that it's a truly generational trait. That they see a world around them that is in times chaos and more troubled than that of their parents or their grandparents, and they realize that no one is going to fix it if they don't. And so I see a generation of people who are aspirational about fixing the most challenging problems of our time. And you know what? They're hell-bent on doing it. And if anyone's going to take care of it, it's them. So the fascinating thing about the way that specializations in our profession are changing the way we work and changing the types of people we might want to think about is that the best specialists are the broadest thinkers. And we work with deep pools of expertise across my firm, and I'm really fortunate to be able to partner with them and collaborate with them on these key projects that we deliver, highly complex program-driven projects, research buildings, airports, hospitals, museums, think tanks opportunities, civic environments. But what I find common amongst everyone who's the deepest thinking specialist is that those people actually have a bigger umbrella sense of how the world is put together. And what they understand about themselves is how their expertise and their uniqueness fits into it, and that's the gift they can bring. And so when we're looking for folks to fit into our practice, we look for that depth, that experience. But the central question is whether they're the big thinker, whether they're thinking of the whole. And the ones that think of the totality are the ones that are the very, very best at the deepest dive of their subject matter expertise.